My first question to you is for audience that may not know about the Asian American Federation. Please give us a little insight into what the Federation is and all the programs the Federation has been doing for past so many years.
Sure. So we are an umbrella leadership organization that works to address the most urgent needs of the Pan-Asian community. And we do that through research, we do that through advocacy, and we do that through supporting our 70 Asian nonprofit members and special initiatives when we feel like there's a need but not enough services. So, for example, we have been focusing to work on address increased access to mental health services for the Asian community that are culturally competent, small business support, which has been really important during COVID, and now the rise in anti-Asian violence in this past year.
Right, and just talking about this anti-Asian violence, I have a couple of questions for you. What has happened to the Asian American community across the country during this COVID-19 pandemic? I'd like to know what the Federation has seen and what has been reported to you all in terms of what's happening to the community.
We've been tracking this for over a year, but we've been working on this issue for about 15 months. We were hearing as early as December 2019 from our small business owners that people were not coming to their stores. We knew that this was right around the time where COVID was talked about in terms related to the Asian community, with the former president saying things like Chinese virus, Kung flu. And so that impact was immediate. And we knew that it was going to start to impact individuals. And we were working with city leaders to address it so that people could know where to report, figuring out safety resources. But we, through this past year, have between our reporting platform as well as the National Stop AAPI Hate, NYPD, and the Commission on Human Rights, we've counted close to or over 1,100 bias incidents, the majority of which have not been reported to the NYPD. So most of these are verbal assaults, but definitely in the past several months, we've seen a lot of violent assaults getting captured by the media and really targeting women, who have been the primary targets, and as well as elders.
Right, and right before I go to my next question about the recent shootings that happened, why do you think that the Asian American community is a target of constant racism and discrimination? This is not a new thing. This has been happening for years now.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for bringing up that historic perspective. I mean, for us in our community, we've always faced anti-Asian racism through policies that excluded us from immigrating here, from policies that put us in internment camps with the Japanese community. We know that Vincent Chin was in the 80s that galvanized the Asian American community when a Chinese American was killed because white auto workers accused him of stealing jobs from them, thinking that he was Japanese. So, and it's recent under the former administration. We saw Muslim ban. We post 9/11. Before that, Muslim community was targeted. So that discrimination against our community is definitely not new. And when you think about sort of all the anti-immigrant rhetoric and policies that were put forward in the former administration, and then on top of that, the stresses and anxieties of COVID, and anytime you have social and economic instability in the country, that the immigrants are going to be the first ones to feel that backlash. So I think it was thinking that some of us are easy targets, we don't speak English well, that we are constant foreigners. It was sort of a perfect storm for people to blame the Asian community because of that inaccurate correlation between the virus and our community.
Do you think the Asian American community right now, with what's all happening, and we'll discuss more on it, is scared and fearful for themselves?
Yeah, and that fear we're hearing about now, but trust me, in our community, when we've been talking with our 70 member and partner groups, people were feeling that fear and anxiety way early, like before we went into lockdown. But obviously with the coverage happening and the extreme violence that people have experienced, and you mentioned the Atlanta shootings, which was something that was really traumatizing and filled us with grief and anger. People are worried that there's danger around every corner, and it's not to say that's inaccurate, right? We know that there's been the U.S. in New York. New York is the city that's had the most number of incidents in the U.S. And we also have the highest number of physical assaults, even though that's not the majority of incidents. So people do feel real fear. We're hearing that people are not going out. Seniors definitely are trying to limit their time outside. And even people in general have to try to change their habits so they're not going out, when they feel vulnerable. But it's not just during nighttime. Daytime assaults are happening. People who have are frontline workers, essential workers, immigrant delivery workers, they don't have the option to stay home. So that fear is pervasive in our community. And people are worried that they're not actually getting access to safety resources. So that's the work that we've been doing through our Hope Against Hate campaign that we just launched a week ago to talk about how we can provide immediate safety to Asian New Yorkers.
Yeah, you just mentioned the Hope Against Hate campaign. Could you give us a little bit more insight into it?
Yeah, this is a plan that we designed in partnership with a number of safety experts in the community in the past several months, and something that we've been working on even prior to that. But as we saw the escalating number of incidents, and we know the NYPD released numbers that the number of hate crimes against Asians in the first quarter of 2021 has exceeded the number of all hate crimes against Asian New Yorkers in 2020 alone. That's high. So our safety solutions talk about how we can create safe deterring solutions for community members who may want to report, for example. Most people do not report because of language barriers, not wanting to interact with law enforcement, not having time. So are there creative ways that we can have people either text a report, use an app in language? How do we train safety ambassadors to know how to de-escalate situations, to be able to have mental health first aid knowledge if there's a perpetrator who may be having a mental break, and also be able to canvass neighborhoods where they can provide resources around where people can call or take trainings, and also be able to escort elders and women in public spaces. And we also want to be able to continue to provide upstander and physical self-defense trainings in language. And that content we're now working with the Center for Anti-Violence Education, who's tailored that content to really be for Asian seniors. How do they use everyday objects to defend themselves so they can make a safe getaway? And we're going to provide those in language: Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, Tagalog, because we're hearing from a lot of community members who don't speak English that they want to have some tools at their fingertips if they are ever targeted. And we're also setting up victim support services. How do people who have been targeted get access to victims' funds for assault-related expenses? A lot of them do not have access to those funds. A lot of our most vulnerable members may have hospital bills, may have day-to-day expenses, lost wages because, for instance, like Noel Quintana hasn't been able to work a second job and hasn't been able to pay bills. And it's really difficult to access city services to support, some of those expenses. So we want to help in that. And we want to be able to connect victims to our mental health partners who can provide mental health support, emotional support in language using culturally competent methods. So there's a lot of different ways that we want to keep our community safe so that people know that there are options beyond calling 911. Because oftentimes when an assault occurs, by the time the cops get there, it's too late. And also sometimes, again, not safe for our community members to be interacting with the cops. Although there's a time and a place. If someone's wielding a gun, for example, like in the Atlanta shootings, you don't want community members intervening in that way. But they shouldn't be the only option people feel that are available to them to have safety.
Right, and how are you funding this big campaign? Because it's promising a lot of things, and I think it will involve a lot of money. Are you getting assistance from the state government, from the federal government? How is it running?
Yeah, we're working on it. It's a big endeavor, and a lot of the funding of $30 million is to re-grant to our member nonprofits that are on the front lines, hearing about reports from their community members, so that they can help them report, they can help them get connected to services, they can connect them to safety ambassadors, and safety partners who can do the trainings with us. And that's the immediate term, but in the long term, working with partners who've been working to address reducing violence across all communities of color and building solidarity partnerships. That's also that work. So we need help from federal government, state government, city government, and private funders to be able to launch that and scale that project across the city. Part of something I didn't mention was, we want to also create safe zones with small businesses and faith centers where people can go to if they feel they're ever being targeted, because we know these incidents are happening all over the city, and we have small businesses and faith centers all over the city. So if we have enough people trained and willing to be able to be safe zones or safe havens where people can go, they can then connect them and direct them to places like our member organizations that can connect them to the services that they need, because every victim has different needs that they want support around.
Yeah, and that's so true. And, they need a lot of help. The community definitely needs help. Let's talk about the Atlanta shootings. Such a tragedy. It killed 6 Asian American women. Do you believe, and does the Asian American Federation believe, that it was racially influenced or motivated? And what is your stand on all that happened in Atlanta?
Absolutely. We, in the midst of the rise in bias incidents against Asians, to have a white man go and target 3 Asian-owned businesses to kill 8 victims, 6 of whom were Asian women, in the context of COVID and the violence in our community does not seem random. There were many other businesses that he could have gone to. There were the way that the media framed it, and even the local law enforcement framed it around his having a sex addiction, was completely misframed, right? We erased the stories of these women who lost their lives, who worked these low-income jobs to survive and provide for their families. And when we talk about that it's not a hate crime or he was having a bad day, you are creating more violence on a community that's already experienced so much violence in this moment. And the families of the victims who lost their lives are suffering, in the ways that they're doing sort of an injustice right now to the way the situation is being handled, and not calling it a hate crime or making excuses or undermining the trauma and pain that our community has gone through. It just exacerbates the issue. Then we're not getting resources to actually address safety. We're then just excusing it as a random incident. But we know that it's not random. We know that it was premeditated. We know that it was in correlation to the hate that the Asian community has been experiencing during COVID. And we want to be sure that it does not get repeated in any form during this time and beyond. So that's why we need to have safety measures in place across the country.
There is a huge issue of deep-rooted racism, systemic racism in this country, and, a lot of anti-Asian sentiments as well. Why do you think it continues over years and years, even when we see these incidents that happen in front of us? There's systemic racism, right? We oftentimes as advocates say, how is it in New York City in 2021 that we're still having to talk about and fight the model minority myth, right? When we go and advocate for funding, when we go and say, our community has needs, that we're in pain, we need access to resources, like the first 9 months of this pandemic, it was ignored. And now mainstream media is paying attention. But for the longest time, no one was listening to us when we said, this is happening, people in our community are getting hurt, and we need to put safety in the streets, right? So a lot of it's invisibility. A lot of it is the sense that we don't belong, that we are perpetual foreigners. A lot of us in New York are immigrants. 70% of Asian New Yorkers are immigrants. Half of us don't speak English proficiently. 25% of us live in poverty. We're the poorest community in New York City. So all of those barriers contribute to why we are invisible. And the fact that we need to make sure that we have leaders who look like us and represent our needs at the federal, state, and city levels is extremely important, right? So shout out to Congresswoman Grace Meng, who has been such a vocal advocate and has used her platform to make sure that we pay attention to the issue. But we need more people like Grace Meng, Congresswoman Grace Meng. We need them at all levels so that we don't have to keep fighting as advocates only. We need the partnership of elected leaders who are beholden to their constituents to represent the needs of our community. Right. I just have 2 more questions left here for you. The first one is, what do you say to people right now, members of our own community, the API community, if they're scared and if they have faced this hate? How should they come, out about it? And what do you have to say to them?
I hear you, I see you, and I am concerned about the trauma that our community is going through. There are options. A couple of the most important things that I think any community member can do is take a training. We are doing a number in partnership with, again, the Center for Anti-Violence Education, a close partner of ours. We created safety booklets on self-defense strategies. We created videos in language as well. So I hope that people will go to our website, aafederation.org, and get access to those resources. But the trainings are really important. So please go to caeny.org to sign up for a training, or sign up for our mailing list so that we can make sure to alert you when we have more of those trainings available with CAE. So that's number one. And number two is, I know that it's really hard for a lot of people in our community to report, but if you do experience an incident, it's really important for us to know the level and depth and type of problem that people are experiencing so that we can connect you to the resources that you need. So on our website, aafederation.org, there is a place where you can report what happened to you. You can just say, hey, I want to report. I don't want actually connected to any services. I just want you to know that this happened. And that's important for us. But if you say, I actually want help in reporting this, or to the NYPD, or I want to be connected to mental health services, we want to be able to be sure that we send those resources your way. So please, in one of those ways, make sure that you equip yourself and that you're not staying silent and suffering on your own.
Definitely, and they're not alone. And that's one of the most important things they need to know. My last question to you is, how do you want us, as the community members of the API community, to help out the Asian American Federation? How would you like the public to support you?
The first and foremost is, please support our Hope Against Hate campaign. We have been so heartened by the level of support that we're seeing from individuals who say, I know that keeping Asian Americans safe is also keeping myself safe. They're my community, and I know that the New York City community needs to be involved in keeping folks safe. So please donate so that we can put out as many resources as possible all throughout New York. But secondly, there's been a lot of outrage at seeing people who don't intervene. So if you're not sure, you want to be an effective upstander, but you don't quite know how to do it, and you're worried about your self-experiencing harm, please sign up for an upstander training with us or with CAE, ny.org, so that you know exactly what to do before, during, and after an incident, so that you can keep Asian New Yorkers safe, but also keep yourself safe. So I think even as Asian New Yorkers, we need to also have upstander training skills or strategies so that we know exactly how to intervene. So that's really important. If there there's a lot of volunteer efforts. So there's mutual aids in your neighborhood, who've been running errands for seniors and folks like that. Think about how you can use that platform to also be escorts or provide safety to community members. And at some point, when we kind of launch this across the city around the Safety Ambassador Program, we do want to connect our member nonprofits to those volunteer efforts so that the non-English speaking community members can get access to, folks who can escort them from place to place, but also, be able to know if there's a presence in their community who can act as a safe, deterring, de-escalating presence.
Yes,
and if you work for a corporation, beyond a statement, please urge them to commit and make an investment in our community. We need that to actually provide safety. We need to, at this point, go beyond statements of solidarity. So we need that investment. Thank you so much.
Definitely. It's the safety that's the most important thing. That's all we're asking, and shouldn't be so much to ask, right? It is 2021.